Good afternoon, everyone. And in celebration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, we are very happy to welcome Joanne Tufo from Historic Voices. She's a historian, writer, lecturer, and performer who has over 30 years of experience. Her realistic and haunting portrayals of historical figures have delighted audience for more than 3 decades in theaters, schools, and auditoriums all over the United States of America. Joanne has also taught at Coastal Carolina University, OLLI program, since 2012, focusing on a variety of subjects, including the colonial, Civil War, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam eras. Many of her programs focus on the noteworthy contributions of women. And again today, we're here to celebrate MLK. I will ask anyone in our in-person audience, hello, or our virtual audience on Zoom or Facebook Live to please submit questions, and then we'll be addressing questions at the end of Joanne's presentation. So without further ado, Joanne, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here, and thank you all and everyone who is joining us today. I am delighted to be able to add Voices of Freedom Following the Dream to the types of lectures that I offer. That's me, Joanne Tufo. And this is how you can reach me. I'd love to hear from you. Sometimes people have suggestions. Some people want to tell me that they like the program, or maybe there's something that I could do differently. So you're welcome to reach out to me at historic.voices@aol.com. And you're welcome to take a look at my website and see a little bit more about the kinds of things that I do and the kinds of programs that I offer. Thank you to Aurora Library for allowing me to bring this program to you. Now, this presentation, just in case you're coming in on this and you hadn't read the description in the catalog, this presentation celebrates the words of Dr. Martin Luther King and their influence on some noteworthy Americans. The program focuses on the lives of people who were profoundly affected by Dr. King's approach to civil rights and paid it forward to educate and inspire people over almost 8 decades. It is quite impossible to encompass the people, the events, the organizations, the world that Dr. King has changed. His presence, his very short presence on this earth, would make him one of the most celebrated and inspirational people that have been a part of American history. So this program, as all my programs are, is presented in PowerPoint and a lively lecture format. So the content's offered in a manner that considers that everybody learns differently. So you can listen, you can read, you can do both, and I hope you enjoy Voices of Freedom Following the Dream. And let me do just a little disclaimer here before we really get into this. And that is that most historians avoid using words like all and every. There is no possible way that I could include all of the people, that even the top 20 people who have been inspired by Dr. King. I try to choose people that are different and bring different things to the table. Some that you may have heard of, and some that you absolutely have not heard of, I hope. Happy Martin Luther King Day. It is observed annually on the third Monday of January. This year it takes place on Monday, January 15th, 2024, Dr. King's actual birthday. So this is especially poignant. The fact that today is Dr. King's birthday and we're together having this contribution. I wondered when I did this, and when I do a lot of my programs, for example, when I do a program on the history of Irish people in America, or even though only a small portion of my heritage is Irish, I wonder, what do I have to offer? I'm not an Irish immigrant. And when I started to think about presenting this lecture, I thought the same thing. I thought, what do I have to offer? I'm female, Dr. King is male. I'm white, Dr. King is Black. I'm a Catholic, Dr. King is Baptist. I was born in the South, but educated in the North. So what is it that I have to bring to the table? And hopefully I'll be able to bring to the table just a little more dialogue and one more thing to talk about at the dinner table this evening. So Dr. King was born at noon on January 15th, 1929, and his parents were the Reverend and Mrs. Martin Luther King Sr., and they lived at 501 Auburn Avenue in Northeast Atlanta, Georgia. Now, one last disclaimer I want to put in there is, when I'm doing a presentation like this, I take into consideration two main things. One, there are people that are going to want to attend this lecture because they know a lot on the subject. And sometimes they want to even see what I know on the subject. And then there are other folks that tune in and they know nothing about the subject and want to learn more. And so I try to include information such as something as basic as who his parents were and the date that he was born, so that everybody's sort of up to speed when we get started. Now, Martin Luther King Sr., I think a great quote from Martin Luther King Jr. about his father was this: I guess the influence of my father also had a great deal to do with my going into the ministry. This is not to say that he ever spoke to me in terms of being a minister, but that my admiration for him was the great moving factor. He set forth a noble example that I didn't mind following. Dr. King was very much influenced by Martin Luther King Sr. So Dr. King's early education started way back in 1944 when he graduated from Booker T. Washington High School and was admitted to Morehouse College at the age of 15. Clearly, Dr. King was a bright young man, and he certainly utilized his potential in a great manner. By 1948, he graduates from Morehouse College and enters Crozer Theological Seminary, which I have to put in is very near where I lived in the Philadelphia area for a very long time. I was a historian in Philadelphia. And the Crozer Theological Seminary was something that I had heard of. And when I started doing my research on Dr. King, this absolutely delighted me to no end. Ultimately, he was ordained to the Baptist ministry on February 25th, 1948, at the age of 19. And what a handsome young man he was. When he went into Boston University in 1951, it was for his graduate studies. This is a photo of Martin Luther King Jr. and his frat brothers. And there he is down on the right. I love the smile. I love all their smiles, but I really like his. He's kind of mischievous. In 1953, he marries Coretta Scott and settles in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, I wish so much that I plan to teach a class on Coretta Scott King, because I think that her story is extraordinary as well. Unfortunately, I won't be covering Mrs. King today, but she is certainly worth a mention in the life of Dr. King. Dr. King's dissertation title was A Comparison of the Conception of God in the Thinking of Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Weinman. And without getting into too many details of the dissertation, or into really any details of the dissertation, let me just say it was examining different ways of thought about God. On June 5th of 1955, he received his doctorate of philosophy in systemic theology from Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts. And in November of 1955, his first child, Yolanda Denise King, who was a force with which to be reckoned, much like her father. I think all of the children had components of their dad. But this is young Yolanda Denise. In December of 1955, Dr. King joins the bus boycott after Rosa Parks is arrested on December 1st. On December 5th, he is selected president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, making him the official spokesperson for the boycott. And by January 30th, 1956, at 9:15, he is becoming aware. I think he really was aware of this fairly early on, but this certainly solidified that he was going to be considered dangerous to people who wanted to put him out of action. And we know that while he's speaking, his home is bombed. His wife and his 10-week-old daughter are in the house. They are not injured. And later, he has to address this crowd that has gathered outside the house, and he pleads for nonviolence. This is what he says from the porch. Don't get panicky. Don't do anything panicky. Don't get your weapons. If you have weapons, take them home. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. Remember, that is what Jesus said. We are not advocating violence. We want to love our enemies. I want you to love our enemies. Be good to them. This is what we must live by. We must meet hate with love. I did not start this boycott. I was asked by you to serve as your spokesman. I want it to be known that the length and breadth of this land, that if I am stopped, this movement will not stop. If I am stopped, our work will not stop. For what we are doing is right. For what we are doing is just, and God is with us. I don't even try to read Dr. King's words in that cadence of speech that he had, very much in keeping with Southern Baptist ministers. I can only speak from my voice. And I think that's important, that we speak Dr. King's words with our voices, no matter what our background is, because then his words become solidified in all aspects of the culture, not just those who are familiar with the Southern Baptist cadence of speaking. Speaking of speaking, Dr. King would not let his work stop because his home was bombed. He courageously goes on, and this is a great photograph of him speaking with people after delivering a sermon on May 13th of 56 in Montgomery, Alabama. If you haven't picked up on it, I work absolutely chronologically in this presentation, and I think that's very important, because how the time moves is going to be critical in understanding the story of Dr. King and his life. November 13th, 1956, the Supreme Court rules that bus segregation is illegal. And that brings a feeling of victory for those who took part in these boycotts. In 1957, Dr. King forms the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This group fights segregation and works to have people achieve their civil rights. And by May 17th of 1957, Dr. King is speaking to a crowd of 15,000 in Washington, D.C. for jobs, for justice, for peace. And the one message that I think Dr. King delivered that has gone unnoticed by some, and that is that Dr. King, his philosophy, his belief was that we fight segregation and we achieve civil rights for all people. He was, to a large degree, he was talking to people of all races that were suffering because of poverty. The Kings bring a second child into the world, Martin Luther King III, on October 23rd of 1957. And there's all three, Dr. King, his father, and his son. In 1958, the United States Congress passed the first Civil Rights Act since the Reconstruction era. Reconstruction started arguably just after the Civil War. Some say as late as 1870, which is, 1870, about 5 years afterwards. It doesn't really matter. It took that long, almost 100 years, or over 100 years, to actually have a second Civil Rights Act. Dr. King's first book, Stride Toward Freedom, is published, and this is the Montgomery Story. And I include books that I think are noteworthy, that you might be interested in reading, because the library asks me to do a program like this, or asks speakers to do programs, because they want to increase activity with the library and know the needs of the community. So definitely reach out if you see books like Stride Toward Freedom or some of the others. Dr. King is stabbed, by an assailant in Harlem and nearly killed. This does not stop him. And also in 1958, he meets with President Eisenhower, along with Roy Wilkins, A. Philip Randolph, and Lester Grange, on attack problems that are affecting Black Americans in particular. This is something, and I think it's something worth looking into and reading more about if you're interested in Dr. King's life, and that is his 1959 visit to India to study Mohandas Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence. Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, same person. The philosophy of nonviolence is very, very important to Dr. King, clearly, in the way that he organizes activities to speak against poverty and to get more jobs for people and to end segregation. This is a photograph of Dr. King removing his shoes before entering Gandhi's shrine. Of course, he didn't meet Gandhi. Gandhi had been dead for about 20 years at the time, but he did get a chance to spend time with other people who knew Gandhi. When 1960 comes along, he moves to Montgomery, Alabama, to devote more time to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the freedom struggle. And he becomes the assistant pastor to his father at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And it just doesn't stop. After the Kings moved to Atlanta from Montgomery, the Ku Klux Klan left a message for them on their front lawn. And this is a moment where I jump a little bit on the soapbox. And I want to say this, that the Ku Klux Klan is still alive in America. I live in South Carolina. I can point you to where they are. So I know they exist. But when I lived in Pennsylvania, which wasn't that long ago, there were Klan groups. So it is critically important that we continue to acknowledge the fact that this is a very dangerous thing in America that still exists. And I just think this is a particularly um, noteworthy photograph. And I think if you look at Dr. King and you look at his face and you look at the fact that he is holding his child, it is particularly moving. Between May 25th and May 28th, Dr. King is found not guilty of tax fraud by a white jury in Montgomery. And this is important for a variety of reasons. As you can imagine, at this point, they're throwing a lot of things at Martin Luther King to see what sticks, how they can shut him down, how they can stop him. And that happens with a lot of figures that you see in activism. And so uh, uh, the interesting thing about this is it's a white jury in Montgomery, Alabama that acquits him. And I find that interesting for a variety of reasons. On June 23rd of 1960, he meets privately in New York with the Democratic presidential candidate, John F. Kennedy. Again, I think you have to read more on this. This is not something that I can really expound on too much, except to say that Dr. King and JFK knew that they could further each other's causes. If Dr. King got more Democratic votes in the South, which at this point was Republican in a sense, uh, because the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. And parties go back and forth and change throughout American history. Some get behind more liberal causes, some get behind more conservative causes at times, and they switch places a little bit. But Kennedy knew that Dr. King could help him get elected. And Dr. King knew that Kennedy being elected could also help make changes for his causes. So it's a very interesting subject, and I do recommend finding a book. One could be Kennedy and King, and this is by Stephen Levingston. Dr. King is arrested during a sit-in demonstration at Rich's department store in Atlanta and sentenced to 4 months of hard labor for violating probation conditions. Earlier that year, he had been put on probation because he was found to be driving with an out-of-state driver's license. This is, again, another kind of thing that we're going to try to throw as much as we can at King. So let's pull him over and hit him with anything. Oh, it's Martin Luther King, and he's driving with an out-of-state driver's license. Let's get him for that if we can't get him for anything else. And then we're going to arrest him in a sit-in because we're fully aware that this probably trumped up driving with an out-of-state driver's license. This trumped up charge would really seal his fate on this arrest. But there were many arrests. I want to say there were 29 arrests in his time. In 1961, another child was brought into the family, Dexter Scott King. And then in May, after an initial group of Freedom Riders, they're seeking to integrate bus terminals. This group is assaulted in Alabama. Dr. King addresses a mass rally at a Montgomery church. So these are once again, these are cases where Dr. King has to come out and address a crowd. It could be a hostile crowd or a non-hostile crowd to him, but in this case, it was I believe it was a hostile crowd. In October of 1961, he meets again with President John F. Kennedy and urges him to issue a second Emancipation Proclamation to eliminate racial segregation, which is very interesting because you would have thought that much of this would be covered in the original Emancipation Proclamation, but it really wasn't. And in all of that, you've also got Jim Crow laws, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. In December, Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy, a very, very close person to him, and the Albany Movement President William G. Anderson and other protesters are arrested by Lori Pritchett during a campaign in Albany, Georgia. Now, I just want to go back for a moment. And I want to also point out Dr. King's face in this photograph. I think it's very, very interesting, and it could mean a lot of different things. I wasn't in his mind, obviously, but I would be very curious to know what he was thinking at that moment. The Jim Crow laws that were established after the Civil War in the southern states was unfortunately, as we have had to do in this nation, things move very slowly at times. And we could have eliminated all of this problem or started a lot sooner if we had in fact allowed for the elimination of slavery in 1787 when the Constitution was written, but we did not, because we could not get the Constitution passed with that included in it. And that's for, again, a different kind of class, but you can look that up and see that we probably wouldn't have had a nation at all had we not given the southern states their autonomy. That would come to bite us back with the Jim Crow laws. And these would be laws that were enacted in the southern states where you allowed for segregation of things like water fountains and I mean, everything was segregated in the South. And some people knew about it and some people didn't know about it. Some people understood segregation and how awful it was, and some did not, particularly those in the North, because even though they certainly had discrimination in the North, it wasn't as blatant as it was in the South. And I live in the South now, so I can tell you that this was very real. I was born in the South, and I remember a time when there were separate fountains for whites and blacks. I was a very little girl, but I will never forget it. And fortunately, my parents were from the North, and we were in the military. And so even though there was segregation everywhere, it seemed, it was less so in the military. So I got a chance to see it from both sides of the from two sides of perception. I shouldn't say both sides, two sides of perception, and that was as a military child and as a child out in the community where open uh, Jim Crow laws were still going on. In 62, Dr. King is arrested again in Albany, Georgia at a prayer vigil and jailed. And after spending 2 weeks in jail, he is released. By September 8th, at the closing session of the SCLC conference in Birmingham, a member of the American Nazi Party assaults Dr. King, striking him twice in the face. 63, their fourth child is born, Bernice Albertine King. I always include these dates because I think sometimes people like to look at a date and say, oh my gosh, I was born the date that person was born. And there is the King family. On April 16th of 63, responding to 8 Jewish and Christian clergymen's advice that African Americans wait patiently for justice, Martin Luther King writes his letter from Birmingham jail. He and Abernathy had been arrested on April 12th and released on April 19th. And I think that's another good thing to read if you want to learn more about Dr. King. So in May of 63, there is also a conflict in Birmingham, and high pressure fire hoses forced the demonstrators from the business district. The police commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor, uses dogs and clubs and cattle prods to disperse 4,000 demonstrators in downtown Birmingham. And we hear again from Dr. King in his own words, in the strength of love or gift from love. These are sermons from Strength and other preachings by Dr. King. And I think that you can read a lot of things, you can read a lot of speeches of Dr. King's, but I think his sermons are really particularly good. Oh, sorry. And on August 28th of 1963, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom happens. More than 200,000 demonstrators join at the Lincoln Memorial. And this is organized, this event, by A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. And this supports all major civil rights, it is supported, by all major civil rights organizations, labor and religious groups. And this is when Dr. King delivers the I Have a Dream speech. Now, this is where I get ready to transition into who Dr. King influenced that I think is of interest. But I think that the I Have a Dream speech is the I Have a Dream speech for a reason. And that reason is that the words can be applied to different voices in America then and now, and for many, many, many years into the future. And if you will, can read along with me. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. These photographs are of the march, by the way. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping the words of interposition and nullification, one day right down in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, that every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and every molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, then we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, Black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty. We are free at last. This photograph is from the 60th anniversary. Of the March on Washington. And it says 2023, still marching on. On January 3rd of 1964, Dr. King is named Man of the Year by Time magazine. That made some people very happy, and it made some people very scared. By December 10th, 1964, the Nobel Prize is given to Dr. King in a ceremony in Oslo, Norway, and he says that every penny of the 54,000 award will be used in the ongoing civil rights struggle. April 1968, during an evening rally at the Mason Temple in Memphis, he delivers his final, "I have been to the mountaintop." And once again, if we can together read Dr. King's words, I don't know what will happen. Now, we've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And Dr. King is shot and killed while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis the next day. Aneva Mae Pittman, an activist, a public school teacher. She marched with Dr. King, and she's a lifelong advocate for human rights, a wife, and a mother. She's a very interesting woman. Aneva Mae was an activist and NAACP member who marched with King. This is what she said about that. "I just felt free with all these people from across the country and the world of all ethnicities together, no incidents or anything, and everybody was friendly towards each other. Why can't this be, all the time?" So we had to come back and double our determination to try to make it be, and we're still working on it. This is her education. She got a Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education and then a Master of Science degree in education from Jackson State University. She additionally studied at the University of Alabama, Southern University, Belhaven College, Mississippi Baptist Seminary, and numerous Christian education courses at the local, district, state, and national levels. She married Joe Pittman, and they had one son, Albert Pittman. And she really was a very active woman. She was a member of the New Hope Baptist Church, the NAACP, the National Business and Professional Women's Club, National Council on Negro Women, Jackson State University National Alumni Association, State Democratic Executive Committee, and the Garden Club Council. These are some of the recognitions that she received during her life from the City Usher Board for dedicated service, to being effective as a board member, dedicated service, with the National Council of Negro Women, so many things that you see here. And the personality of the South. And I like to pull that out of all of these things because she truly was a personality and really well known in her community and beyond. And just looking at this photograph of her, I think tells you how much color she had in just who the woman she was. Interestingly enough, she had a very tragic passing. On January 3rd of 2023, so not that long, a year ago, it was reported that at 88 years old, she did not survive an overnight fire in her home. And that's a photograph of that tragic event. She was loved and revered in Jackson, Mississippi. And this was part of her obituary, and I wanted to share this with you. This was in the Jackson Advocate. If I went to a rally, Mrs. Pittman was there. If I went to a march, Mrs. Pittman was there. If I went to a press conference, Mrs. Pittman was there. If I went to a workshop, Mrs. Pittman was there. And if I went to a sporting event, Mrs. Pittman was there. But she was registering folks to vote before and after the game. Of course, she was always at church. Yet her ministry was not one of words, but of deeds. If Mrs. Pittman invited you to church, you knew that some work was being done, such as feeding and securing supplies for folks. And yes, she was registering people to vote there too. Ultimately, she was not interested in a prayer that wasn't followed by some work. And I think that says so much more about her. And if you want to learn more about her and women like her, there's a book called Woman Power Unlimited and the Black Freedom Struggle in Mississippi by T.M. Morris. And I think that this is a very interesting perspective. In her own words, she said, be an example to our children and do all you can to keep the young people from going down the wrong road. You talk to them. And if you can assist them in any way, you do that. And her message was simply about action, about tireless action to change things, to do things, and most importantly, to get people to vote. Frankie Adams Johnson, another very interesting person that was influenced greatly by Dr. King. She was an activist, college professor. She marched with Dr. King and a community organizer. This is what she said about Dr. King. I felt somehow we had achieved whatever this freedom meant, that it had been achieved there in Washington. We had marched, we had listened to speeches, and we had been moved by the great Martin Luther King Jr. Reflecting on the summer of 1963, she said, I envision that our quality of life as African-American people would be better for more of us than the handful that it is. I don't want to put a damper on celebrating and commemorating, but I will just say there is still so much more we need to be fighting for. This is her at the actual 1960, at a civil rights demonstration in 1963. Now, in her early life, she had come from a sharecropper family, and she was from Pocahontas, Mississippi, a very small village, where she was sort of isolated in one respect from racism, but exposed to it, as she describes it, as soon as I got to the sidewalk in our town, outside our village, that's when I knew where the white people lived. And I'm going to give you some recommendations on how you can listen to her words. So she was from this single parent home, and her mom was a domestic worker. She said that somewhere between the ages of 12 and 15, she moved to Jackson, Mississippi with her mother. And her mother fulfilled her dream of becoming a businesswoman there in Jackson. Now, she went to church schools to the 5th grade. Then she was bused to a public school. But the schools, again, were segregated, so she went to a Black school, and she had to stay home. And this is what a lot of people don't realize, that even many years after the Civil War, people were then sharecropping. And for all intents and purposes, they were enslaved to being sharecroppers. The children had to stay home and work during the planting season on local plantations. And this left a lasting impression on her, this idea that, you know, this made her different from people because the other kids got to go to school during that time, but she got pulled out for work, or the white kids did. She eventually went to a segregated high school and then went to Tougaloo College. And this is where she really discovers activism. If you want to get to know her, and the Library of Congress is an amazing resource. If you go on their website, you can get all kinds of oral history interviews from people throughout recent history. So, for example, there's the Veterans History Project, and that's all about veterans that have been alive to record on video interviews. And these will become priceless as we lose many of our Second World War folks and activists like Frankie Adams Johnson. And so she was also known as Malika, but I from a historian's perspective, I don't know her as that name, but she was also known as Malika Johnson. But anyway, look up, just go online, the Frankie Adams Johnson Oral History Interview, Library of Congress, and it was done on December 6th, 2015. DC Everest Oral History Project also did an oral history with her, and I recommend getting that, and there is the link for that here. Forrest Whitaker, the actor, is another person that really has spoken on his feelings and put them into action. He was honored as Boston University's 4th Martin Luther King Fellow, and that was in 2013. And he said this about Dr. King. In King's Day, it would have seemed crazy to expect the level of progression that resulted in the election and re-election of Barack Obama. But he too had a dream and worked tirelessly to achieve it. And this is what the soft-spoken Whitaker told the crowd of mostly students at GSU's Metcalf Hall. He said, "Stop for a moment, think about that. What seems impossible versus what is possible." We followed him because he was holding your hope, the hope that your life would be full and complete with equality. There are few people in history who take that position that allows people to follow and change, who represent something powerful. He did it in this country and made people walk with him towards a better life. I think it's difficult for the next generation to see things that happened before. So you have to continually historically remind them and try to make them aware of what Martin Luther King was doing, that we are all in this together and that hope is alive today. Forrest Whitaker was born in July 15th of 1961 in Longview, Texas, and his parents were Laura Francis, who was a special ed teacher, and Forrest E. Whitaker Jr., who was an insurance salesman, and 2 younger brothers and an older sister. He grew up in South Central Los Angeles in the 60s, and he dreamt of becoming an actor. But there were few Black role models for him, and there was some local gang violence in the schools. His parents did not want him to become a part of that. So they moved so that he could enroll in a different junior high school where he had to travel 2 hours each way to attend. And then he eventually went to Palisades Charter High School and played on the football team and was in the choir. He went to California State Polytech on a football scholarship. Unfortunately, he got a back injury, and then he changed his major to music, singing in particular. He toured England with the Cal Poly chamber singers and was accepted into the Thornton School of Music at the University of Southern California. He also was part of the university's drama conservatory. In '82, he graduated from USC with a BFA in acting, and then took a course at the Drama Studio London. It's defunct, but it was in California. Now it's defunct. 2004, he got a degree in the Core of Conflict Studies of Peace and Reconciliation at NYU's Gallatin School of Individualized Study. He said, believe in yourself, believe in your dreams, pursue them and follow them and activate them. And here is his activism. He does a tremendous amount of charity work. There is the the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative, and this fosters peace building programs. It trains youth in conflict resolution and develops businesses in the areas of conflict. And he focuses his work in Africa, Mexico, and the United States. He also is the UNESCO Special Envoy for Peace and Reconciliation. He started out as a Goodwill Ambassador, and he's there to support and develop initiatives that empower youth, keep them from entering or remaining in cycles of violence. And there he is working with some folks. He also is a supporter and public advocate, rather, of Hope North, and that is a boarding school and vocational training center in northern Uganda for escaped child soldiers, orphans, and other young victims of the country's civil war. And there he is with one of the young men involved in the program. And this is just more of his work. And to bring him full circle, on April 16th, 2007, he was a recipient of the 2,335th star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his contributions to the motion picture industry. And that is at 6801 Hollywood Boulevard. Let's talk about Carrie Mae Weems, and this is in the area of art. Martin Luther King has influenced a lot of people in many areas, not just political activism or social activism, but in art as a form of activism. This is one piece that she's done called Blues and Pinks. And this is just a view of it's an installation in 2020. Her work, she is one of the most influential contemporary American artists. Her work centers on family relationships, cultural identity, sexism, class, political systems, consequences of power. She's been doing this for over 30 years, and she has a real complex body of art. She uses photographs, text, fabric, audio, digital messages, installation as well. She has had installations and or shows at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the First Center for Visual Art, the Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York, and the Centro Andaluz de Arte Contemporáneo in Seville, Spain, and that is the Contemporary Art Center of Andalusia. And that's a beautiful photograph that she's done. And that's one of her installations. And this is called A Woman Observes. It's from a series called Constructing History in 2008. You'll often see in her work Black women as silhouettes against different things. And you'll also see things like this. So she has had awards such as the MacArthur Genius Grant. The Congressional Black Caucus's Foundation for Lifetime Achievement Award, BET Honors Visual Artist Award, the Lucy Award for Fine Art Photography. She's one of 4 artists honored at the Guggenheim's 2014 International Gala, the ICP Spotlights Award from the International Center of Photography, the W.E.B. Du Bois Award from Harvard, and honorary degrees from many different universities. And this is just a composite of some of her work, some that I've shown you, some that I haven't. And according to Holland Cotter from the New York Times, Williams has long been one of our most effective visual and verbal rhetoricians, and when she tackles complex subjects in complex ways, the results are deeply stirring. As I mentioned before, when I look at this, I envision a woman on a plantation. What is, and I have lots of questions that come into my mind. Is this before the war? Is it after the war? Is it during the war? Is it the war at all? Is it later? So there's a lot of questions to be asked there. And I think any good art does that. And that might not be any of the stories of this photograph, but that's what I think of. According to Ernest Larson, Art in America, it is Weems' conviction that radicalism and beauty are complementary, not antithetical, and that gives her work its distinctive edge. And according to Mary Jane Jacobs' Ritual and Revolution, her work speaks to human experience and the multiple aspects of individual identity, arriving at a deeper understanding of humanity. Dorcetta Taylor, she is an environmental sociologist and a professor of environmental justice at Yale University. She said, in King's Day, we fought to drink from the same water fountain. Today, we fight to drink the same quality water. So this is a whole different area that you would think of. What she does is she runs 2 diversity pathway programs to help low-income students of color, first generation, and allies gain work experience through internships in environmental organizations and agencies. So she really focuses on this amazing area. She was born and raised in rural Jamaica, and by 1983, she had a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies and Biology with honors from Northeastern Illinois University, a local in some ways. In 1985, she had her Master's of Forest Sciences from Yale and a Master of Art and a Master's of Philosophy. In 1991, she had a joint doctoral degree in sociology and forestry and environmental studies from the School of Forestry and the Department of Sociology at Yale, first African-American woman to earn a doctoral degree from Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. In 2010, she won the Alan Schneeberg Outstanding Publication Award. And he wrote Environment and People in American Cities, 1600s to 1900s, Disorder, Inequity, and Social Change. And I think that is a book you want to read if you're interested in this area. She wrote it very well. She knows her stuff. Another one that Dorcetta Taylor wrote is called Toxic Communities, Environmental Racism and Industrial Pollution. In 2012, she was the principal investigator of a 5-year United States Department of Agriculture grant to study racial and class disparities in food access in the state of Michigan. And lots of awards. Now, this is a woman that we can be very proud of in what she has done. This is just the first page. recognized by AARP, one of 8 leaders who carry on Martin Luther King's Jr.'s legacy in 2020. That's the one I really like to talk about. Women in Sustainability, Envision Charlotte and Wells Fargo. And I'm going to just show some pictures while I go on, and there are more things that she has been honored for. This woman is truly someone who is out there and changing the world. And another page. And another page. Unbelievable recognition for outstanding environmental achievement from Northeastern Illinois University, a recognition for distinguished service to the university and to higher education, Northeastern Illinois University. Some of you out there may have had her as a teacher. Billy Andre, he is an Adventist with Adventist Development and Relief Agency. Look, I couldn't find out anything about Billy Andre, except a few things. He said Martin Luther King encouraged people to not be indifferent to anybody, anytime, anywhere. And he has taken that thought into the ADRA's emergency response program. He's the manager for Africa and Europe. And then there's the Good Men Project. And we're coming into the end of my program here, but I want to talk about the words of everyday Americans that I was able to find through the Good Men Project. Dr. King inspires me because I'm no longer afraid to share my love of someone from a different race, like people were before the civil rights movement. My life is full of people from completely different races and backgrounds than me, and I couldn't love life more. Because of him, my daughter's future is better now than if he didn't do what he did. MLK inspired me from the day that I learned who he was. When I was younger, I learned my first real lesson on what racism was when I was trying to make friends with my next door neighbor's son, and his parents refused to let us play because I was white. I didn't understand why someone would be mean as to judge me solely based on what color my skin was. After learning about Dr. King and hearing his I Have a Dream speech, it really opened my eyes to the world. And from that moment on, I was destined to follow my heart, to love with a big heart, and to always stand up for what I saw as right, even if I stood alone. MLK has been and always will be one of my role models. Honestly, Dr. ML King inspires me because he wasn't perfect, and yet he accomplished great things. He was not a god untarnished doing amazing things. He was a human being with faults, and yet something in his beautiful, brave soul and his dynamic leadership led himself and many of us others to fight valiantly for respect, dignity, and equality. I think we all should remember that when we personally think we aren't worthy of the fight. And I love that smile on Dr. King's face. In the face of diversity from the ignorant, he stood for what was right, even though he knew it would probably cost him his life one day. He did what he had to do anyway. I chose to put this picture of Dr. King in his office with a picture of Gandhi on the wall. Like Gandhi, I think Martin Luther King may have had a premonition of an early death, that he would have to give his life for his beliefs. His bravery and eloquent sermons, I was too young to have joined the march, but I would have. I have a friend that actually has a button from the march and holds it very close to their heart. And finally, I want to finish with the King children, Yolanda, Martin III, Dexter, Bernice. Yolanda was 12 when she lost her father. Martin was 10, Dexter was 7, Bernice was 5. The words of Yolanda Denise King. Yolanda was an actress. I just ran out of the room and screamed, "I don't want to hear it." To this day, my heart skips a beat every time I hear one of those special bulletins. I believe that Yolanda was ironing and listening, and the television was in the other room. And that's how she heard about her father's death. She went to Smith. She got a master's degree at NYU. And a lot of the characters she played as an actress were drawn from and inspired by Black history. She said, "My father could be bigger than the life behind the podium while at home. He was a little teddy bear, so gentle and warm. I know he's very pleased with what I've done." At 51 years old, Yolanda died in 2007, just a year after her mother's death in 2006. Martin Luther King III is a human rights activist, a philanthropist, the fourth president of the SCLC. I was very fortunate to be able to travel with Dad maybe 7 or 8 times. The most important time, however, was that personal time we spent with him. Dexter Scott King is or was, I'm not sure if he currently is, the chairman of the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. He portrayed his father actually as Martin Luther King Jr. in the 2002 American television movie, The Rosa Parks Story, and even voiced his father's 34-year-old self in the 1999 educational film, Our Friend Martin. He really looks like his dad a lot. And then there's Bernice Albertine King. She is a lawyer. She said, "I guess my mother didn't realize that she didn't prepare me because she told me earlier he wouldn't be able to speak to me. And yet I hear his voice booming out of the speaker, and I'm looking around wondering where he is." Where is he? Remember that very well. And this is what she said on the 50th anniversary of I Have a Dream speech. "We are here today to call upon our faith, to call upon our spirituality, to call upon our higher selves, recognizing that nothing in the world will ever change if it's not for people of faith coming together." I want to stop the share right now and say again, thank you very much for allowing me to give my perspective on, get my picture back up there, my perspective on Dr. King and some of the people he influenced. Probably not what you expected at all. It was important to me to give a synopsis of Dr. King's life, to let us read together some of his speeches, and to get to know the well-known and the not so well-known people and the ordinary person and how their feelings are about Dr. King. And hopefully that's something that we've all shared today, and that we'll go on and share not only just today, but all year and every year.